All right, Erev Tov,
Hmm,
everybody.
hmm.
And this Erev Tov, everybody. Good. Here we go. All right, we are getting ready for a Shabbos that we're going to be receiving the Torah one more time. Shabbos Parshas Yisro is the Shabbos that during the Torah reading, we're all going to stand up and we're going to relive again the giving of the Torah, the giving of the Ten Commandments, and the Parsha that tells us about the giving of the Torah and the Ten Commandments is known as called Parshas Yisro. In English, they call him Jethro. Yisro was the father-in-law of Moshe. And the Parsha begins with the words, Vayishma Yisroi. Yisroi heard. Cohen Midian, who was Yisroi, it tells us right away his title. He was the priest of Midian. Chosin Moshe is the father-in-law of Moshe. You heard, what did he hear? Es kol asher oso, Elokim, leMoshe, uleYisrael Amo. Everything that Hashem did to Moshe and to Yisrael, his people, ki hoitzi Hashem es Yisrael miMitzrayim. God has taken out the Jewish people from Egypt. So Yisrael heard about the great wonders and the great miracles of the great Exodus. And as a result of hearing the incredible news, all the special stories that happened, Torah tells us Yisro takes his daughter Tzipporah and his two grandchildren. This is Moshe's wife and Moshe's children, and she is traveling with them from Midian. Midian is the country where he is the high priest, and is traveling from Midian into the desert to go meet Moshe and the Jewish people. Now, why were they with Yisro? Why weren't they with Moshe? Why wasn't Zipporah and the two children together with Moshe? Those of you who your short memory is still functioning, remember that Moshe travels with his wife and his two kids into Egypt. Remember the story with the circumcision, with the Brit, that the middle of the way, a snake appears and wants to kill Moshe for not circumcising his son. So we know that Moshe put his wife and his children on the donkey, and he was traveling back to Egypt after the revelation of the burning bush. Moshe takes his wife and his kids to Egypt. How are they suddenly in Midian? So there's a part of the story that is not written, but the Medrash tells us that when Moshe arrived with his wife and his kids to Egypt by the border, his brother Aaron came to greet him. He heard that Moshe is coming with his wife and his kids. Aaron never met Moshe's wife. He never saw his nephews and his nieces. I mean, his nephews, there was two nephews. He never saw them. So he came to the border to greet. And when he comes to the border, he sees Moshe carrying his wife and his kids. He says, Moshe, we are suffering here, and all the Jews who are here are struggling. Why are you bringing your wife and your kids into Auschwitz? Why are you bringing them into Egypt? Send them back. So Moshe did the right thing, I guess, and he told his wife and his kids to go back to Midian. Maybe he had some messengers or helpers, and he sent his wife and his kids back to safety, to Midian, and he spends in Egypt the entire time where the 10 plagues are happening and the entire unfolding of the story of Exodus. Moshe's wife and his two kids are not in Egypt at that time. And now it's almost a year later, maybe a half a year later. Now they are reuniting at the desert of Sinai. I was mentioning the other day that it's interesting when the Jewish people celebrate the first Pesach out of Egypt, it says they had an obligation to tell the story. Now, everybody experienced the story last year. So who did they have to tell the story to? Who are the only ones who didn't know what happened? Moshe's wife and kids, because they weren't part of the great Exodus. So they were the only Jews who really weren't in Egypt. I mean, maybe there was other people who were born, but Moshe's wife and two kids were the only ones sitting by a Seder the following year, listening to the blood and the frog and the hail. They were like the two Jewish children where this entire story was new information. They never heard about that. I mean, maybe they heard about it, that was on the news, but to actually hear it firsthand, like telling the Haggadah, the way we tell it to our kids, Moshe's wife and two kids were the only Jews who were actually not in Egypt doing the Exodus. It's interesting fact. But what I want to focus on today, and I'm wondering what exactly did Yisro heard that caused them to move out of Midian and to enter the desert. So the verse just tells us he heard what God did to Moshe and to Israel's people. And the Talmud actually brings a discussion. What did he hear? And there's opinions in the Talmud. And the Talmud basically says he heard about the crossing of the sea and about the war of Amalek. That these two things, this that the Jewish people went through the crossing of the ocean, and this that the Jewish people had a war against Amalek, these two stories were such fascinating and incredible stories that caused Yisro to pack his bags, take his family, and go out to the desert to participate and be part of Moshe and the Jewish people. Now, the Talmud doesn't mention that he heard about the 10 plagues. The Talmud doesn't mention that he heard about the plague of the firstborn. All the other wonders and miracles that happened to the Jewish people, about the manna, about all the other stuff, we don't hear. The only thing he was fascinated by, the crossing of the sea and the war of Amalek. Something that we're going to pay attention in a moment, and we will see that in these two stories lays something very fundamental that causes Yisro to decide to move out of his comfort zone and actually convert. He ends up converting and becoming Jewish. Not only he converts, he actually goes back and he converts his entire household, and they become a part of the Jewish nation, and they actually inherit a portion in the land of Israel. The city of Jericho is being inherited to Yisro and is to his descendants. Quite interesting that as a convert, he receives a portion in the land of Israel, like the tribes of Israel is being divided. He gets a share in it as well. Last week, in Parshat Beshalach, we studied about the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea, whatever they call it, the Yam Suf. And there was the incredible, fascinating miracle. We spoke about it in great length. The Jewish people crossing the sea, accumulating a tremendous amount of wealth. I mean, the whole picture, if you just have an imagination, especially if you studied it as a child, without watching any movies of the Ten Commandments, you allowed your own childish imagination to imagine the crossing of this of Yam Suf. It's a fascinating image of Jews, the people passing and the Egyptian drowning. And that was one major event in last week's Parsha. And then we had a couple more events. We had the event of the manna, food suddenly coming down from heaven. You know, this is an incredible miracle. Every morning, Jews would wake up and there would be a Amazon Fresh delivery from Shamayim straight to their porch, the front door with the food. And then we had the event of the water being sweetened. And then we had the event of Boishi hitting the rock and water comes out. Then at the end of the Parsha, we had the war of Amalek. We didn't spend much time last week in the class talking about it, but just briefly, after all these great miracles, the Jewish people are moving forward after the crossing of the sea and the singing and all of that. Amalek shows up, and he's actually some type of a distant relative to us. He's Esav's grandchild, and he puts up a fight with the Jewish people. He's actually the first nation to fight the Jewish people, actually called the arch enemy of the Jewish people. And in the war of Amalek, the Jews are very skeptical if they're going to be victorious or not. They're actually wondering, Ayesh Hashem bekirbeinu im ayin. Is God with us? Or maybe God has abandoned us. Remember, they just saw the crossing of the sea. They see manna falling from heaven every morning. They saw the water sweetening. They saw the rock producing water. They saw the 10 plagues. But something happened when it came to the battle of Amalek, where the Jewish people are bewildered and are questioning themselves, is God with us or not? And suddenly, the Jewish people have to put up a fight. They have to use arms. Yehoshua is being summoned by Moshe to be the commander and the general, and they gather people and they have to get themselves ammunition. And it's a war. It's a real war against an enemy they have to kill, or God forbid, get killed. It's a war. Something within that war, we have that image of Moshe standing on the mountain with his hands lifted up. He had to hold his hands up and pray the entire time. And the idea is, the Talmud says, at the end of the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, that the Jewish people would look up and they would see Moshe's hands up. That would kind of like be like a direction to be able to look to Shemayim and remember that God is the one who runs the war for them. So it was Moshe had to stand with his hands up the entire time, just to serve as a reminder that God is fighting that battle for them. But this is the events of last week's Parsha. And this week's Parsha, the major event of the Parsha is the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's the major event. But until the giving of the Torah of Mount Sinai, we have three aliyot. This is about a third of the Parsha. He's telling us about this visit of this father-in-law, the father-in-law Yitro. And we just told you from the Talmud that what Israel heard about those two events, the crossing of the sea and the war of Amalek. It's interesting to see how the other nations of the world are reacting to the crossing of the sea. Now, if you follow the song that the Jewish people sing, the Az Yashir Moshe, the Jewish people are singing, in that song, it actually talks about the reaction of the nations. Shamu Amim Irgazun. The nations heard and they trembled. Chil Achaz Yoshvei Pelashes, the settlers of Philistine, were stricken by fear, by dread. So we see that the crossing of the sea had an effect on the nations of the world. And later on, fast forward 40 years later, this is when Joshua sends spies into Jericho. So you remember that story? In the beginning of the book of Joshua, Joshua sends his spies into Jericho to scout out the land. And when they come to Jericho, they are visiting the house of a woman named Rahav. Rahav was a harlot, a prostitute, and Rahav she had a house right by the city wall. And when they visit Rahav reports, when she finds out that this is the spies, she reports to them that the entire world, all the kings, all the ministers of the world are powerless since that story of the waters of the ocean being dried out. Meaning to say that the splitting of the sea, this event of the splitting of the sea, was something so powerful and had such magnitude to it that the entire world was shooken to its core in a way that caused a fear and a dread that lasts for 40 plus years. Something extremely powerful that really shook the world and reacted. Now, the Medrash says that water split everywhere. But not only the water in the sea split, But anywhere there was water, it split in two. Something about Hashem taking that miracle. I mean, those days, I don't believe people had televisions or they had ways of having a visual of what's going on. But somehow the idea of having a visual how the splitting of the sea happened, the Medrash says that God made all waters split. When that waters of the ocean in Egypt split, so I guess people were sitting in a bathtub and suddenly the water in the bathtub split into two. And they had a visual how what's going on in Egypt. So the idea of live streaming, yeah, to give a live stream of what's happening miles and miles away, God made that happen doing the splitting of the sea. That this splitting of the sea was not just something that happened in this remote ocean where the Jews and the Egyptians were just congregating together. One is running from the other, one is running after the other. The event of the splitting of the sea was something that somehow, in a divine way, every place a person was standing in front of water had a full visual of the splitting of the sea. So that shook people to their core. But it's interesting to see how they react. So some people, their reaction was fear, dread. They were scared, overwhelmed. We have the reaction of Amalek. What does Amalek do when he gets scared and he was shooken by what he saw? He went to fight the Jewish people. That was his reaction. We have one reaction of one person who is not Jewish, a leader of a nation. He's the priest or the high priest or the super priest of Midian. That he hears about the splitting of the sea. And what does that do to him? Not just fear, not just dread, not just he comes and he wants to convert to Judaism. He wants to make that extra move of stepping out of his comfort zone, stepping out of his universe, and he wants to cleave and connect to the Jewish people. The secret of Yitro was that first word in this week's Parsha. Vayishma Yisro. Yisro heard. In listening, hearing, there are different levels when a person hears something. I am sure many of you hear a lot of things throughout your day. You hear news, you hear certain rules that are being given by government, or lahavdil, certain rules of halacha. You hear about medical findings that are somehow standing in the way of some of our pleasures, if it's findings about the dangers of sugar or the dangers of eating certain things. We're busy hearing a lot of things every day, all day. Our ears are always open to hear things. The question that you can ask yourself is, from all the stuff that you hear every day, how many of those cause you to actually move out from the place you are in and cause you to one, actually change your life? How many people can hear or read articles about the dangers of sugar? And as they're reading the article, as they are hearing it, at the same time, they could sit and enjoy ice cream at the same time, knowing that at their age, at their state of being, this is dangerous. It's dangerous for their being. Because in hearing, there is hearing, and then there is listening in. I don't know what the word for it in English is. In Yiddish, there are two words, heren and dar heren. Heren means to listen. Dar heren means to listen in. It's a listening that carries in it a reflection on self. It's a listening where the person says to himself, if this is what I heard right now, what does that mean to me? And this takes so many layers and levels within people. Sometimes your spouse tells you something they're upset about. And you hear it, you heard it for so many years, you don't even hear it anymore. But then one day, you are listening in. One day, the spouse talks to you and they tell you, and they said, told it to you for the last 15 years. But what happened suddenly? Suddenly, you didn't just hear it, you actually listened in, and it moved you, and something within you changes, and you want to become a different person. Every nation heard about the splitting of the sea. Shamu, Amim, the nations heard, they trembled, but nothing. They trembled and passed the ketchup, You know the metaphor of pass the ketchup? The metaphor of pass the ketchup is, you sit at a restaurant, the group of friends, and someone says, "Oh my gosh, you heard what happened?" And he shares a tragedy that just happened. And suddenly there's that quiet, everybody is dropping their pizza. Wow, what a tragedy. And then someone says, "Can you pass the ketchup?" A person can hear things. And we are hearing things all day, every day, all the time. We are being bombarded with information. But what we are missing, and this is what makes Yitro, the great man, the Vayish by Yitro, the entire Parsha is called after his name, the Parsha of the giving of the Torah. Because Yitro is not just a listener. Yitro teaches us, what does it mean to listen? What does it mean to hear something? That when you hear something on the inside, something within you has to begin to shift and change. Something within you has to cause you to move out of your way. Sometimes moving out of your comfort zone, sometimes moving out of your habits, ways of being, and really choosing sometimes a new life that is going to be very different than the life you live in. Amalek, when he hears about the Jewish people's miracles, he also listened. He was also moved by that. It moves him to violence. It moves him to fight it. It moves him to crush it. Other nations hear about it and they move on. They are afraid, they are scared, they tremble. Nothing changes. Yisrael, on the other hand, is the teacher to each and every one of us. What does it mean to listen? Because this is the essence of a Torah. The Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai. What did they respond to Hashem when Hashem was offering him the Torah? Naaseh v'nishma. We're going to do and we're going to listen. This is not two separate answers. We're going to do and we're going to listen means that we are moved into action. And that is the listening that will come after that will be a listening that's past the doing and the action. Obviously, nishma means to understand, to learn, to comprehend. But naaseh nishma means I am moved to doing. I am moving, not just hearing information. Obviously, in order to do, you have to hear information. But I am ready to do, meaning to say, I'm ready to be moved into action by whatever you say. Who is the Rebbe who teaches the Jewish people how to listen? Yitro. Yitro becomes the name of the parsha, is the one who understands what does it mean to listen. Now listen to what he does to Moshe when he arrives. He watches Moshe teaching the Jewish people, answering their questions. And he turns to Moshe and he says, you can't do it this way. You are going to fall apart. There are so many problems, so many people. You have to create other leaders that you can delegate to them the responsibility. Yisrael understands that in order to be able to listen to each person and really know what the person is experiencing, to be able to help people, you can't just be a passive listener. You have to be an active listener. You have to be someone who is moved by what is being shared with you. Obviously, certain questions only Moshe can answer. Adavar HaKoshe Yaviu Elecha. The hard stuff, the difficult stuff, sometimes we need Moshe himself to be the one to listen. But Israel's suggestion to Moshe is create a system where there are many, many listeners within the people, that through them we're able to create a system where everyone has an ear they can talk to and felt validated, felt understood, felt heard, and the one who listens is reflective and moved by what they say. One of the greatest complaints of our children is, you're not listening to me. We're living in a generation who is very distracted. Wonderful gift to have a smartphone, and wonderful gift to have entertainment, and a wonderful gift to have all this access to this incredible gift that comes with technology. But if you want to pinpoint the issue, the problem of our generation is we are very distracted people. If you have a smartphone, you have Facebook Messenger, text messages, WhatsApp messages, and let's say you have a couple more of those telegrams, you are not attending to anyone at anything because you are distracted. You can be on the phone, and at the same time, you're busy watching a video. You can be in the middle of a conversation with someone, at the same time, you're texting someone else. They call it multitasking. But I'll tell you a secret. Multitasking means you're doing absolutely nothing. How do I know? You ever saw some person juggling? Juggles 4 balls, 5 balls, 6 balls. I'll ask you a question. How many balls does he actually hold in his hands? When someone juggles, how many balls does he actually hold in his hands? You're right. Nothing. Not even one. Because when you multitask, nothing gets its attention. Obviously, thing gets done. You can do things, you can accomplish things, you can move paper, you could answer bills, you can somehow respond to technicalities with multitasking. But nothing is moving you. Nothing is changing you. Nothing is in the place of like, wow, what you just said is incredible. I hear what you say. I am going to think about it even more. Yisro teaches us what is the Vayishma. What does it mean to be a listener? What does it mean to be someone who hears, but not just hears as a shiver and moves on? Someone who hears and actually moves to action actually is going to change his life, his family's life, his community's life as a result of what he just heard. And this is the essence of getting the Torah. The essence of giving the Torah, the essence of being a recipient of the Torah is that you are going to be a person who stands to attention, that you are going to be someone who not just is hearing things, but someone who is ready to reflect and change your life and move yourself into action as a result of what you are hearing. This is something that we as a society have to work on ourselves these days. We need to create spaces and times for ourselves to be in a state of self-reflection. If you are a married person, to spend time with your spouse, when you're not just playing or watching something, where you have a chance to listen to what your spouse is saying. taking it in, repeating what she just told you or he told you, and seeing, did I actually hear you? And moving it into a place of action. So how do we going to behave from now on as a result of what you just told me? People 20 years into their marriage find out that they've been dismissive, they've been hurting their spouse's feelings completely unknowingly. And the spouse kept on saying, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, I'm hurting. And somehow it wasn't registered. There wasn't actual listening. And the spouse gets upset and angry. And why are you angry? And then finally, somehow, after 20 years or 30 years of marriage, they sit there like, is this the first time you're telling me that? I'm so shocked. No, I'm busy saying it for the last 20 years. What happened? Finally, they heard. Finally, they had a chance not just to be in that hearing place, but the Vayishma, the Yisro type of listening. They were able to listen in a way that it transformed them. We are standing today in the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Today was the 15th day of Shvat. By the Sephardic Jews, the 15th day of Shvat is a very special holiday. They have a special tikkun, special prayers that they recite over the different fruits that they eat, the frutitkas, and they make special prayers over that, and they have special readings from the Zohar and from the Talmud and from other verses. By us, Ashkenazim and even Chabad, the 15th day of Shvat is a minor holiday. We don't recite Tachanun. And also the custom is to eat from those fruits that the land of Israel was blessed. And a lot was written, a lot was discussed. What is the meaning of this holiday? Why are we celebrating this holiday? The reference to this holiday comes from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that there are four Rosh Hashanah. There's the Rosh Hashanah in the first of Tishrei, and then there is the Rosh Hashanah in the first of Nisan, and there is the Rosh Hashanah in the first of Shvat, and then the last thing the Mishnah says on the 15th of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah for the trees. Now, what does it mean, Rosh Hashanah for the trees? So there's a legal implication. It has to do with produce who are starting to bud out this time of the year. If you go outside, even in this cold, snowy weather, if you live in the Northwest, especially in a place like Seattle, where we actually have 4 seasons. So you go outside, even this week, you're going to notice how things are starting to bloom, things are starting to bud out, the trees are starting to bloom, and you notice that the awakening, the ground after being frozen for the last 4 months, suddenly it's awakening and new life is emerging. It has to do with the laws of tithing. Which fruits you tithe from which year. So the beginning of a new year for trees, fruit trees, is from the 15th day of the month of Shvat, that was today. Now, what does it have to do with us? Why don't we say Tachnun? Why do we so excited about the holiday of the fruits of the tree? Now, this is based on a verse. The verse actually is in the book of Deuteronomy, called Chumash Dvarim in Hebrew. Over there is the laws of going out on a battle, going out for war. And among the things that it says regarding going out to a war is, it says that if you have to create a siege around the city, so in the olden days, when they had to release their hostages, when they had to win a war, what did they do? Something that I don't understand why they're not doing it right now. It's a very simple and practical way how to get your way in. They would surround the city from all corners. No one can go in and no one can go out. There is no water entry. There's no food entry. And obviously, there's no truckloads with goods, humanitarian aid brought in. The city is closed down from all sides. And you wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. What happens in the time of a siege, the people inside of the city, slowly their resources will dwindle and they will start getting hungry. And part of getting hungry is people are going to start dying. People are not going to get what they need. It creates a tremendous amount of pressure. And the hope is that by the time the city that you are trying to conquer is going to just give in, it's just going to give in. People want to eat, people want to drink, people want to survive. So they will give in and they will allow you to conquer them, to take them over. An old trick in the book, something that no one of us understands. Literally, anyone who is rational doesn't understand why the state of Israel, since October 7 until today, have not done that. Simple technique. You could surround this area, Gaza, and close off all entries. Don't allow any humanitarian aid. Create a tremendous amount of pressure where there's no food, no gasoline, no electricity. And the only option is give us our hostages back. So I don't know. I'm not going to sit and spend my night here tonight with you talking about this. But this is what the Torah tells us. You're going to come to a city to fight a war. You're going to create a siege. And in order to create a siege, you're going to start destroying things around the city. Comes the Torah and says, Al tahrit et itzah. If you see trees who are bearing fruit trees, don't cut them off. Why? Ki Adam eitz asadeh lavo lefanav b'matzor. Rashi says it as a question mark. Is the fruit tree a human being? Meaning to say, you came in to fight humans. What is the tree's fault that you're cutting him off? But Rashi is not the only one who translates this verse. Others translate the verse a little different. That the Torah basically tells us that a human being is resembling a tree. We are resembled to a fruit tree. And the same way, you wouldn't just go and take away the life of a human being, the same way you shouldn't take away the life of a fruit tree. And because 15th of Shvat, we are celebrating the Rosh Hashanah for the fruit trees, it's really a celebration of mankind. And there's a lot of writings. There's mystical writings. There's halachic writings. I want to bring out one point that is very important as we're talking here about the topic of listening, and not just listening, but reflecting, is the idea of a tree versus any other creature that's available is trees grow. They have cycles of growth. They have times where they are blossoming and they are full of flower and they are full of life. But then as we watch the months of the fall arriving, we are watching this death process where suddenly something that was full of life just a couple months ago, full of fruits, full of production, full of life, suddenly what happens within the cycle, the leaves fall off, the fruits fall off, and we watch this creature completely coming to a state of decay, frozen, lifeless. But then suddenly comes the 15th of Shvat, and this barren tree who stood right here outside and we looked at it every day, suddenly, out of this deep slumber, out of this deep decay and death, suddenly this tree starts receiving life again. We don't see it in the animal kingdom. We don't see it, obviously, in minerals. We see it particularly in a tree, and even more so in a tree that gives fruits, in a fruit tree that works with a year cycle. And if something is obvious throughout this 12 months of the year, that the tree, even at the times when it's total decay and it's totally completely non-productive, there is something about the tree that we know is always there. And that is the roots of the tree are always connected to the ground. Regardless if he's producing fruits or he's not producing fruits, the bottom line is that tree is something that's always connected to his base, always connected to his roots. In the moment you remove the tree from its roots, you know that when the spring is going to come, nothing is going to happen. There was once a great philosopher came to visit the city of Tel Aviv, and it was right there where they were building Tel Aviv. And he was known. Today there's a university named after his name, Bar Ilan University. So he came to visit Tel Aviv, and in honor of his visit, the city took some trees from different gardens, and they kind of like uprooted them, and they put them like right by the house where he's going to visit. They placed those trees. Lots of people came to greet this great philosopher as he was arriving, this great professor. And the mayor of the city of Tel Aviv, Achimeir, was also there, came to shake his hands. And because there was a lot of people and they were pushing, so some of those trees kind of like fell over. And it was a little bit of a mockery. And he turns to the mayor of Tel Aviv and he says, without any roots, nothing will grow over here. Obviously, hinting to the mayor of Tel Aviv that if this is going to be just a secular city, without an attachment, without connection to the Jewish background, to where we came from an ancestral place, nothing will develop, nothing will grow in this place. The idea of the holiday of the trees symbolizes the secret of growth. The secret of growth and development by a person is the ability to be able to go through the different seasons of life. There is going to be times where you're going to be fully blossoming, completely ripe, expressive, giving out your entire existence, placing yourself in front of the whole world, speaking up, being that person that inspires and teaches and preaches, and everybody is there eating from your hands like that beautiful tree. But then comes times when you need to take a little bit of a rest. By nature, this is the time of the year. Come September, October, the leaves are falling off. The tree looks like it's going into death. But as long as you are connected to your roots, you understand that this is just part of the process. Stay connected to your roots, stay connected to yourself. And what's going to happen is the next season will come and you will re-blossom, maybe even more beautiful than the last time you were blossoming. The ability for a person to grow and evolve comes from that ability of a person being able to listen and hear and reflect. As long as you are curious, as long as you're someone who is open to the new information that's coming your way, you're going to grow. You're going to develop. You're going to evolve. You're going to be that evolutionary person who changes and develops and grows. And the moment you become stagnant in your ways, the moment you are not open anymore for new information, the moment you decided, I'm not growing anymore, then what happens is that life, that potential of life, begins to get lost, and the decrease and the digression starts to take place. The secret of being young, and being young is not an age on the passport. Being young, meaning to say, the spirit of a young man, is this power of being able to always be a person who reflects on what goes on in the world around them, always imagines himself becoming better, always imagine himself growing. Every time someone shares something, take a moment, you pause, you're taking it in, you're letting it be something that means to you something. This is the essence of Torah. And that leads us to the final point of tonight's class, and that is the end of this week's Parsha. The Parsha ends with the mitzvah of building an altar to God. Obviously, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to start learning about the building of the tabernacle. But in the end of this week's Parsha, after the giving of the Torah, interesting ending where God Almighty says to Moshe, I read it inside, at the end of the Parsha of this week, it says as follows: if you will build, build for me an altar. This is the last reading after the giving of the Torah. Hashem says to Moshe, so you should say to the Jewish people, you have seen that I spoke to you from the heavens. Don't make for me a god from gold or from silver, a altar made out of earth. You should create for me, and you should bring on it all your offerings, all your different offerings. And if you will build a stone altar, make sure that it's built without any metal. Yeah. And then the last verse in the parsha is, do not create steps to go up to my altar. So your nakedness should not be revealed. And this is the mitzvah of having a ramp to go up to the altar. So the altar in the temple, in order to go up to the altar was very tall. In order to go up to the altar, you had to go up with a ramp. Interesting mitzvah. And this is how we end the parsha. What's the difference between a ramp and steps? And what's wrong with having steps? So obviously the Torah tells us when you have steps, you have to lift your legs. And when you lift your legs, even though really you're not actually showing your nakedness, but something about close enough to showing your nakedness. Okay? And we learn from it the importance of respect. That even if a stone, a ramp that's made out of stone, we have to be careful how we are showing certain parts of ourselves, how important it is to be more refined in our behavior between each other. If towards stones we have to be so respectful, so how much more so we should be respectful to a fellow human being. Okay, this is one of those interesting halachas. But really, when you take it into the spiritual meaning and the metaphoric meaning of this mitzvah, the way it's explained in Hasidus, in Kabbalah, the difference between steps and ramps. Both of them symbolize walking up. You're going up towards the altar. You're going up towards bringing an offering to God. You're bringing yourself closer to God. There are two ways of bringing yourself closer to God. One way is step by step. I do something good, and I'm very proud of myself. And I see that I'm good at it. Tomorrow I'll do something else good, and I'll be proud of that. And like this, I keep on growing in my Yiddishkeit. I keep on growing in my spiritual life. I take steps. That's how I grow. Now, the issue of that is, some of us can share their own experiences, that when you become proud of yourself about something, that a mitzvah that you do, almost always your evil inclination will prove you that you actually didn't get it. Meaning to say, let's say you're feeling all proud of yourself that you are davening at a certain hour, and you're like ready to celebrate that milestone of your life. Almost always, right after that, suddenly it becomes so difficult, it doesn't happen, and you don't understand. I thought I was just fine. I just got rid of it. I just kicked it out. It's interesting what happens to us when we work that way, is that we are always kind of like one step forward or two steps back. What does the ramp symbolize? The ramp symbolizes is I am going upwards. And going upwards means to say is every day I go upwards. Now, what happened yesterday? It's okay. I'm still going upward. There is no idea of resting in one place. There's an idea of constantly moving forward, going out of my way, and without resting in one particular place before I go up to the higher level. Again, speaking about growth, this is the Tu B'Shvat message here, to be like a tree that keeps on evolving, keep on growing. Listening, the idea of Yitro, being a listener, that creates the fuel to be able to grow and move out of your way in order to adopt a new lifestyle. All those pieces of what we spoke today. Comes the end of the Parsha and it gives us the message. You have to commit yourself to a life of going up a ramp. When you go up a ramp, obviously there is milestones that are going to happen. But when you go up a ramp, there is no such a thing of a moment of saying, okay, I'm good. You're always good. You're always moving upward. You're always in the place of taking the next step. And then what happens as a result of that, you don't get a chance to reveal or expose or bring yourself to a place where you suddenly have to confront your powerlessness or confront your evil inclination. What Hashem wants from each and every one of us is to be committed to growing. A lot of people have this mistake and they believe that they have to become a certain prototype of a Jew. I need to become like my rabbi. I need to become like the Rebbe. I need to become like this person, like that person. And only when I will have this type of a Shabbos table, then I will be considered a Shabbos observant Jew. It's not true. What you have to commit yourself is to go up that ramp. And every step of that ramp, you are going up, getting closer and closer to Hashem without any limitations. And it's interesting that going up the ramp is the idea of taking action even when the feelings are not there, even when you don't feel like you belong in that level. Steps by step mean to say is you have to be on that level. And you have to be there and you have to be present. And the ramp on the other end symbolizes the idea of ongoing action without taking that step where you are rested and you say, that's my place. You always keep on moving upwards. I want to share with you a beautiful story. So there was a Jew who lives actually in New York, and him and his wife, yeah, were before they got married. It used to be a custom that they used to go to Chatan and Kala, the groom and bride, used to go for a private audience to the Rebbe. That stopped in the early 80s, when the crowd really became big and it was not anymore sufficient to even do that. So his name is, and I even tell you his name was Meshulam Weiss. His wife's name is Eileen. So Meshulam and Eileen, both of them went before their wedding to the Rebbe for their private audience. And as they walked in, they handed over their note with their invitation to the wedding, asking for their blessings. And the Rebbe used to always ask, should we speak in Yiddish or in English? Because this was American people. And Meshulam said, I speak Yiddish. I will understand. And his future wife, Eileen, said, I understand Yiddish, but I could only speak in English. And the Rebbe spoke to Meshulam in Yiddish, and to his bride, he spoke in English. After a few minutes, she asked the Rebbe, can I talk to you in private without my future husband being here? She seemed very, very disturbed, like she needed a private moment. The Rebbe looked at Meshulam and hinted him, to go out of the room. The Rebbe's secretary was standing outside, was like wondering what just happened. And he said, my future wife wanted to have a private moment with the Rebbe. Fine. The door closes, and 20 minutes later, she opens back the door. 20 minutes. It was a long time being with the Rebbe. 20 minutes later, she opens up back the door, and Meshulam goes back inside. They go inside, the Rebbe gives them all those blessings about their marriage, about their future. After he finishes saying the blessing, they both walk out of the Rebbe's room. She doesn't say a word what happened in the room for the 20 minutes. He is very confused what just happened, very unusual. They both go their ways. And the week before the wedding, customary is that groom and bride don't meet, they don't spend time together. So he doesn't have a chance to even ask her, what did the Rebbe say? What happened over there? After their chuppah, after the wedding ceremony, they go into what they call the Cheder Yichud. This is the room where groom and bride go in before they go out to the celebration. They go to have the time alone where we have the witnesses standing outside to make sure that they went into a room by themselves. The first question he asks you is, what happened there? And she says, I'll tell you the truth. I wanted to call off the whole wedding. I have issues. I'm very aware of my issues, and I was not ready to get married. I'm a very impatient person. I have anger outbursts. And I knew that I don't want to bring you into a relationship with me. I thought maybe I need a couple more years to work on myself, to become a better person. So I was very, very scared to start a relationship with you. So standing in front of the Rebbe, I felt like that's probably the safest person to talk about it. So when you walked out, I told the Rebbe that truth. This is what I know about myself. I know that I have no patience. I lose my patience very quickly. I'm very angry all the time. And the Rebbe said to me this interesting message. He says, when you get married, you have kids. And your kids are going to teach you what does it mean to be patient. Because with kids, you can be impatient. And your kids will help you to educate you how you can just be angry and just express your anger. And the Rebbe says, until you have kids, in order to begin practicing patience, I want you to volunteer in a hospital, helping people who are having all sorts of physical limitations and be as an assistant to them. And that will help you practicing patience and not losing yourself in anger. It will be a wonderful thing as preparations to have children. Okay. After the wedding, goes through a couple of months, and Eileen doesn't get pregnant. Now, it's customary when you're married as an Orthodox Jew that within a couple of months, if everything is okay, you're supposed to get pregnant. And here passes by 6 months, 8 months from the wedding, and she doesn't get pregnant. Okay, so they go to official doctor's visit to check out if everything is okay. The doctor makes an exam and he turns to her and says, sit down. Sits down her and her husband and says, I want to tell you what the condition is. Based on my findings is, I want you to tell you is that you will never be able to have children. There is something within your physical body that is needed in order to be able to conceive a child. You don't have that. There's no way for you to ever have a child. So accept that reality. Think about adoption. Think about love. They were devastated. They were heartbroken. They walked out of the doctor's office and basically the whole universe fell apart for them. And they decided, if one doctor had an opinion, they'll go to another doctor. They take the findings to the second doctor. The doctor gives one look and the doctor says, I'm looking at those findings and I can tell you that that doctor is 100% correct. There is no way you will ever be able to conceive a child. Based on your physical situation, you don't have the ability to conceive a child. They walk out of the second doctor's office and now they were really heartbroken, really devastated. And they sat down and they wrote a letter to the Rebbe, pouring out their heart. And the Rebbe gave them a blessing. 9 months later, they had a baby. And not just one baby. They had 15 children, 1-5. Fast forward 35 years. 35 years later, she is in the stage of her life where she has to go see her doctor. But as she moved to a new place, so she's meeting a new doctor for the first time. And she goes into her first exam, and her doctor says to her, he says, I'm so sorry. You're an Orthodox lady. I'm sure your life was really tough. And she said, no, I live an Orthodox life, but I live a very happy life. He says, no, but I'm looking and I noticed that you didn't have any children. He says, Doc, I gave birth to 15 children. 1-5. He says, you gave birth to 15 children? He says, yeah. In the last 35 years, I raised 15 children. The doctor says, it's impossible. According to my medical findings, you cannot have ever given birth to a child. I can't believe it. Now, she went back to her doctor who helped her give birth. This was the second doctor who gave them the second opinion, who himself couldn't believe what happened. And he put those two doctors together. Rabbi Weiss shared this story, and he pointed out that what the Rebbe did to them, the Rebbe gave them the key to children. And the Rebbe told her at that time when she was visiting before her wedding, the Rebbe said, you're going to have kids and they will teach you how to be patient. But in order to do that, you have to work before that with people in the hospital and practicing patience. What that story told her is the idea is that yes, literally, physically, naturally, the gates are kind of closed for you. There's no way you can have a child. But something about the ongoing practice of being a person who is acting in compassion, in patience, that will be opening a gate that naturally is not even there. Naturally, not even there. And really, what that story tells us and what we learn today is that when a person is ready to listen, when a person is ready to move out of his comfort zone, when a person is ready to grow, when a person is ready to make those steps on the ramp, all those things, a person opens up gates to certain things that you maybe yourself gave up already on. You maybe said to yourself, I'm so old, I'm so frail, I'm so over the hill, I'm never going to change. Something within the practice of doing this, keep on walking up that ramp, keep on listening in, keep on being the person who is committed to grow, stay connected to your roots, and keep on growing. Yes, might be times when things are dark and the leaves are off and the fruits fell apart. Keep on staying connected to yourself. And you know what's going to happen? Miracles will happen. God Almighty bless us. We should all be blessed to finally see the great miracle, the miracle of all miracles, the revelation of the redemption, coming of Mashiach speedily in our days, and the restoration of all the brokenness and all the hardship